Hey, what's up, Toby? We made it another week.
Whoop, whoop.
It's the process.
Glad to be
It's
back.
the process step.
Process
It's
podcast.
process step podcast.
Oh, is this the Process Step
This
podcast?
sure is.
Oh,
You,
well, hallelujah.
I
We're in the
know
right place.
you have today's topic for the day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Holy smokes. So, the thing that I'd mentioned just before we getting on the call was looking across a couple processes. There's some things like I'll say time reporting as an
Yeah.
example, and this is something you and I are intimately familiar with.
Yep.
And time reporting is super binary. You put time in or you did not,
Yep.
and then you submitted it
Yep.
or you did not,
Yep.
and then a manager approves it or not,
Yep.
and then it's paid or not.
Yep.
But it has all these very clear gates as a process.
Yep.
A number of inputs are super clear, accountability, and I'm speaking in general terms,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certainly in our world,
Yep.
the process and ownership, the accountability for each step is really clear and well understood.
Yep.
And so if something doesn't happen, it's easy to troubleshoot
Yep.
and see where we've missed a critical step.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing that I had bumped into, this was just a couple weeks, and in the last couple weeks, was that we treat all processes as the same.
Yeah.
When we talk about we have process to manage.
Yeah.
And we say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But some processes are managed by a small army of people.
Yeah.
Others are managed by one or two,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
That simple, go, no go, stepwise process
Yeah.
is so oftentimes, though, aggregated and treated as of equal importance to a process with multiple inputs,
Yeah.
all guiding at the same step.
Yeah.
And a lot of data that's held by several different people
Yeah.
where accountability lies across not even inside a single department,
Yep.
perhaps multiple departments,
Yeah.
right? And so thinking about like a sales process where marketing is doing outbound work.
Yep.
And they're contacting people. And
Yeah.
then the sales team is trying to figure out who did we reach out to? What have we provided them in terms of collateral?
Yep.
Hands over to delivery. There's that whole process as a total gets into management of contacts and management of conversations and management of accountabilities, the sale itself. And so the thing, Chris, that I've been noodling on, and this is the punchline for today, is how do we intelligently start to index the relative complexity of processes inside of an organization? Because it's easy to look at a simple process and identify deficiencies or slack.
Yep.
A lot of times it's kind of invisible for more complicated processes, but we don't necessarily assign some kind of complexity index
Yeah.
to help stakeholders understand it. So I'd love to get your thoughts. I know that you and I have traveled different paths in seeing different things.
I think the way that we should approach this is like I tend to be very in the weeds, right? And so I tend to be at the tactical layer, whether I'm implementing, Monday or Salesforce or whatever. Whereas you've kind of been more at the management or consulting level. And I will tell you, when we do implementations, it is greatly misunderstood how many people and how many processes are stuck in the human head or stuck in the community. It is literally super shocking. The other thing that I see a lot when I'm doing processes is specifically around process complexity is processes will never be simpler than day one.
So I want to pause there for a second because that's really interesting. And so there's a phrase that you and I, have used with clients certainly in the last several years about simplicity on the other side of complexity.
Yeah.
Which suggests that once we understand the complexity, there's opportunity to simplify.
Yeah.
And I think from a process debt management perspective, that's the fantasy that a lot of businesses live under, that if we only understood our complexity, we could make it simpler. But your statement was just a process is never more simple than on day one.
Yeah. I think that there are points in time in which you can greatly head towards simplicity.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's entropy and we're moving towards complexity.
Yeah.
And so,
Say more. Why do you think that is? I don't want to believe it, but my experience tells me it's true.
uh, there, when you go, because first of all, I think homeostasis is alive and well, meaning we as human beings don't ever want to change ever,
Absolutely.
regardless of whether it makes us better or a better craftsman, better at our job, more healthy, more mentally healthy. Like we like homeostasis. We like the way that it is, even if the way that it is bad. So at
Right. Because
some
it's
point,
familiar. It's what
yeah,
we know.
and at some
Yeah.
point, there is a point in time in which you are changing systems, you are changing ownership, you are changing something in the apple cart is being turned over. And in the turning over of the apple cart, people are more willing to change. And so in our world, it tends to be system changes. So we're changing from X to Y, from
Yeah.
system A to system B. And generally, my experience is that when people change from A to B, where they miss is they miss in that they want to solve all of A's deficiencies, even though they might just be an entropy and a solving of a problem that's not a new real problem in the new system.
Well, so Chris, I think that's a valid point that complexity is like gravity.
Yep.
It's it's one of the, missing Newtonian laws, but complexity does just compound. And so um I so oftentimes hear about organizations with dozens of adjacent projects in their portfolio. It's the long list of things I'll clean up,
Yeah.
And it's not like cleaning around the house. This weekend I'm going to tackle the
Yeah.
garage and I'll put everything in bins and then I'll go through and sort
Yep.
the bins, but at least it looks clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that case, we're kind of hiding some of the mess,
Yeah.
but we're putting it into bite-sized pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, But when it's a series of moving parts, oftentimes what we see are symptoms and we don't
Oh, yeah.
always understand the root
Yep.
cause. And so we introduce more complexity around a symptom
Yeah.
rather than solving the problem. And
The-
so I'm curious if you felt like you've been part of an effective solving mechanism
The
to prioritize the processes that merit the energy.
I wish I wish I could say yes all the time, always. Um,
Every day, Toby.
but
Yeah.
the reality is like the easiest thing to do is to say this is what we're going to change. That's the
Yeah.
easiest, right? It's significantly different to try to implement that change and try to get that change to one person, then two people, then three people, then 10, then 100.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, let me ask it really tactically, Chris, because you're right. You're talking about the adoption side.
yeah.
And what I'm talking about is the assessment side.
Yeah.
And so thinking about a client that says, our sales process is immature,
Mhm.
our inventory management isn't working right, we're struggling to get product out the door,
Yep.
and our accounting practice is, our practices are good,
Mhm.
but we think we've outgrown our system.
Yeah.
Like, so oftentimes when presented with those three things, I think it becomes a question of strong perspective or opinion to tackle those. Right. And yet there should be a more objective way to understand where does the complexity lie,
Yeah.
and then where might I pick off the highest value, lowest complexity process to solve,
I think the assessment's really interesting, right? Because it's easy when you're in a process to say like, oh, it's just simple, right? But to be able to transfer that, we've talked about this before, like in order to transfer process to someone else is actually can be quite hard. And I think some of complexity assessment or that process assessment comes down to what's your base. And so if your base is flexible, right, then your process is probably not well defined or stuck mostly in people's heads, right? And then I
Yeah.
think the other complexity indicator you could use is number of tools. Or even
Good
simply
indicator.
number of pages if it's on a web that you have to go to do your task. And
Yeah.
so the smaller number of tools that you have, the least complex it's going to be. The more rigid those tools are, the less complex it's going to be. Now, it might also be rigorous and there might also be missteps, but I'm thinking about like I've recently done some engagements where the base is Excel or Google Sheets.
Sure.
And
Which you're infinitely more comfortable with than the average bear.
yeah, no,
It's a
I love
tool, but
those.
it's what people do with the tools.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
absolutely love those, but they are not good process tools.
Yeah.
They are good for their flexibility, but they have high, a high process index because there's a lot of human knowledge that goes into them.
Yeah. I like these as elements of how we might start to assess process.
Yeah,
How many various tools, how actually flexible is it, or how
sure.
rules based is it? The more rules based, the more discoverable it is to
Yep,
see how it works.
yep.
That makes sense. I also feel like this idea of identifiable accountability is a really significant piece of it. If
Oh yeah,
anybody can reach in and perform it,
yeah,
then that also means nobody can reach in and perform it,
yep,
and nobody's held responsible.
yeah,
So that idea of accountability or ownership, clear ownership,
yeah,
feels like it's a dimension.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is if you hand a task to someone,
Mm. Yeah.
does the task get lost? Right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
meaning like you know, uh, we're social creatures, right? And
Yeah.
the community's super important. Even in the
Right.
hierarchy of the management and subordinate roles, those are
Right.
really unique because the manager might be spitting out, here are my 10 tasks. The IC might have only grabbed, 3 or picked up 15 out of the 10, right? And so that transferability and accountability between peers um, is difficult knowledge work.
Yeah. It is. Well, and that's why we used to write standard operating procedures,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And have procedure guides. Um, I don't know, do those still apply today? Do people, I'm far enough away that I don't know that I've used a procedural guide for quite some time. I've crafted many of them as part of my change management work,
Yeah.
to help people understand the stepwise process. But I go back to your comment of the process is never simpler than when it's first
Yeah.
introduced.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
when you flip the card and reintroduce the process
Yeah.
for the first time. That
Yeah.
may be the simplest version that's presented.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on SOPs?
I think I'm very kinesthetic, which is, why I
Mm,
like doing
yeah.
implementations.
Hands
SOPs,
on keyboard
yeah,
and doing the work. Yeah.
SOPs have always driven me nuts. When I've used them, when I've created them, people love them. Um,
Yeah.
I think I think we're moving away from SOPs because the ease of getting information via AI or something is
Mm,
so quick. I don't know
yeah.
if that's good or bad, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like even in writing, so LLMs are pretty good at code, and so LLMs have been
Yeah.
writing Python code for me.
Yeah.
And so I don't, which is not necessarily processy, but like it could be the same thing in that if you asked an LLM, what is the SOP here? It would give me a checklist. Now, do I have to
Right.
follow that checklist? Like it makes me think of, the Checklist Manifesto by Argwal, I think is his name, but he was talking about pilots, right? Where it's like very complex and there is
Yeah.
a ton of steps to get a airplane off the ground. And in order to get it off the ground, you've got to follow all of these checklists because, people were dying. That's generally a bad thing. And so they
Yeah.
built this checklist. Now, that's
Yeah.
super important at every step of the process, and you have to do that based on FAA regulations. And yet, our work is so fuzzy in knowledge work most of the time,
Mm,
unless you're a developer, right?
truly. Yeah.
It's just so fuzzy that you don't have those checklists.
Right. Yeah. I pulled that up. I don't know that I've read the Checklist Manifesto. It says Atul Gawande.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It is super interesting. And I love that example. I think about the medical landscape, and they too have care maps.
Yep.
And it's not telling a physician or a clinician
Yeah.
how to insert a needle into an arm
Yep.
or how to make the cut. But what it is saying is wash your hands before you begin.
Yep.
Yeah, to make sure the patient's been scrubbed
Yep.
down and they have the
Yeah.
disclosures, and then do what you do
Yeah.
best. You know, I love that thought on a checklist because that too, a sufficient checklist to provide guardrails on a process
Mm-hmm.
may also be an indicator of the complexity.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I feel like SOPs are written at so many levels. Sometimes it's keystroke and sometimes
Yeah.
it's screen level,
Yep.
right? But that idea of a checklist is still, were you sure to do all the right things before
Yep.
you call it complete?
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Well,
check.
I think some of that is in the plane example, people were dying, right? So it's business critical,
Yeah.
right? There is this, we do tend to over index our internal processes in order to completely cover the uncoverable, I think.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you can't take that one checklist and say, well, we're going to do a checklist for everything. But if you did a checklist for your QBRs, that would make sense, right? If you did a checklist for checking your email, you could simplify it.
Yeah.
Like I think the hardest part in knowledge work is our work lives everywhere. Like our checklists live
Yeah.
everywhere,
Well,
right? And so it makes it like that's probably the number one personal process that is our checklist is not batchable.
yeah.
Be-
Isn't that an interesting affair? Smaller companies where you're wearing many hats, how many discrete checklists? Or do we
Yeah.
just, as you said, oftentimes it's just in our head.
Yep.
Do I think I've covered all my bases? Moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Now, what do you think?
No, I was just going to say I love this topic
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
just forces you to slow down and say what's a good process versus what's a bad process. And I will say
Totally.
that one of the things that drives me nuts about doing process-ish type work is that most of the time it starts with the ending report and not with the people that are doing the work. And so
Totally.
I would say a lot of people could greatly simplify and streamline their processes if they worried about reporting after a full adoption of a new system. That would serve them very well. And it's what I push for for our clients because you just don't know, right? Like and maybe this is me just being, beat up a couple times where I go, I go and build a nice report and then the process changes and then the report doesn't matter.
Yeah. I will say that there's a visible versus invisible dimension as you're talking about the reporting.
Yeah.
And in my past, one of the most successful stepwise changes that we introduced had to do with the caliber of the financial reporting.
Mm.
And so I sat in sales ops at the time.
Yeah.
The finance team was only reporting on historical activity.
Yep.
And then the next best thing they had about stuff that was at least a month old.
Yep.
Which meant that the deal had been, the actual delivery of the deal had happened the month before.
Yep.
And that the inking of the contract was no less than a month before. They were talking about near history, but the best they could do is describe things 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And then they would go to the budget forecast and say, this is not what was forecasted.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in sales, we said, no, we know how many people we spoke with today.
Yep.
We know how many quotes we issued today.
Yep.
We know what the lead pipeline looks like for the next 90 days.
Yeah.
And so looking up that curve, it's a different perspective. And so in this case, what we effectively did was we blended views.
Yeah.
sales op team was moved into finance, and we really started consolidating that.
Yeah.
And so much of what sales did really well was forward looking.
Yeah.
And then what accounting always does well is talk about what happened.
Yep.
And make sure that the classifications are correct. And
Yeah.
so I think that, again, maybe that visibility, and you said discoverability earlier, which I think is, right. Value has to be transferable and discoverable.
Yep.
And so if we can't see the work that's taking place, then it's hard to know.
Yeah.
It's like if a bear farts in the woods,
Yeah.
but he's there to hear it, then
There
did
you
it
go.
really happen? So
I love this topic, Toby. This is a good one because process complexity is we are always heading towards entropy. And so unless you're focused on paying off that process debt that you have, the processes will not get better. They will just get more debt ridden.
yeah, until they bankrupt.
Yeah,
I guess
for
is the
sure.
hard truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Good
man.
conversation, brother.
Yeah, we'll catch you next week.
All right. See you then. Bye.